Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Red Path. In this episode of the Delvarus is in the Details painting series, we're going to focus on a very popular topic that a lot of people have requested of me, and that's blood effects. So, blood effects are a very kind of common thing to apply to world leaders and chaos in general. So, today we're going to focus on a couple of different ways of applying those effects to your models in a sort of method that kind of doesn't really take away from the overall paint scheme while also being, a really interesting sort of focal point for your models. So we're going to look at how you can apply it to both infantry and larger scale models like vehicles as well. So sit back, get yourself a brew, and let's dive into this episode. Okay, everyone. So currently I have this World Leaders Champion model that I've been working on. And basically I've got all the weathering steps and, everything done up to the blood effects. Now I usually do the blood effects last because generally they kind of go over everything else. If you think about it logically, everything that's interacting with this model, it's going to be the blood is what is like on top of everything, just due to, how he's fighting and stuff like that. So I'm going to cover a couple of different techniques that we can do to add blood effects to this guy. They're going to involve some like chipping, some older blood, fresh blood, that kind of thing. So yeah, we're going to dive into that, and I'm going to show you how to make up your mixes first of all. Okay, so to make your mix for dried blood, we're going to be taking some blood for the blood god, which we have here, some Ren oxide up on top, and some Abaddon black. Now this is a little bit of a tricky mix to get right, and what you want to do is try and make sure that you have a very dark color. It's going to appear much darker here on the mix than it's actually going to be, so you can see we're starting to sort of mix in the center here, and we're going to introduce more and more blood for the blood god. So it's a really unusual looking mix. It's not going to look great until you start to apply it on the model. It looks very dark currently, but as we basically drag it out, you can see we're getting a very muddy, brown, bloody kind of look, which is basically the color of dried blood. So that's kind of the key to the mix, is not introducing too much black and brown, or at least as much as you kind of feel like. So yeah, once you're happy enough with the tone and the consistency, which I'm pretty much am here, you can start applying it to the model. Okay, so before we actually apply our blood effects, we're going to add some, it's basically thinner for oil paints. You could use pigment fixer, enamel thinner, whatever suits you. We're going to apply it to the area that the blood effects are going to be. Now the reason for this is it actually creates quite an interesting effect. It raises the surface tension on the actual parts, which means that the blood from the acrylic paint is going to separate in a very interesting way. So I'm just going to take a little bit of it here on my brush and essentially just apply it all over the axe, which is where a lot of the blood is going to be. We're going to apply some up on his hand here as well. You're going to see it creates a kind of a sheen on the model. And we're going to put some on the axe here as well. So the actual reason for this is going to become very clear as we start painting, because the separation is going to become quite interesting. It allows you to get some really nice streaking effects very, very easily, which would normally take you quite a while to do. So I'm going to get that laid down, and then we'll come back for the blood. Okay, so we're going to start by doing our dried blood layer. Now I'm using a really old beat up brush here for this, and basically you can see we're going in very fast kind of streaking motions and stabbing at it as well, and you can see already that the separation from the thinner is starting to have an effect here, where the paint starts to break up a little bit, creating some really interesting patterns and effects and stuff. Now you just want to be kind of random with this. You want to make sure that there isn't really a pattern. Obviously just have the blood in places that it would naturally be anyway. Don't be, I guess, too random with it. Make it look logical. So we're going to do quite a bit here on the teeth of the blade and sort of the main axe. So you get the feeling here that we're just basically kind of stabbing and streaking. you know, getting quite a nice effect going on. So I'm going to do that over the whole model, and we're going to come back then after that. Okay, so you can see here we have our sort of dried and older blood layer down. Now I focus mostly on the actual chain axe here, and a little bit around the gauntlets and stuff, because, you know, that's where the blood is going to be getting most. And it's very important to understand that you don't want to go overboard with blood effects, especially on world leaders. Obviously in the lore they get themselves covered in blood all the time, but for tabletop minis you don't exactly want to drown your model in blood effects, because it's just going to ruin the aesthetic that you have for your model. So, you know, be sort of free with it, but don't go too crazy. So you can see here as well, you know, we've got quite a nice separation effect going on the back of the axe here and on the gauntlet too. A lot of fun stuff is going on. So next up we're going to add some fresher blood effects, and essentially this is going to mean going back over the areas we've already did while avoiding I would say about 40% of the area, and we're going to be hitting it with basically some fresh blood for the blood god, just to sort of have this like mix of newer and older blood coming in over the model. It'll have an interesting sort of variation in terms of like the textures and the colors that you have going on. So let's get that ready. We're going to move on to that next. Okay, so we're just working that blood for the blood god in now. So you can see I'm basically, you know, kind of randomly attacking the areas that we've already covered. Again, paying special attention here to the teeth of the chain axe. That's where the freshest blood is going to be. So we're basically going over the area that we've already attacked, and we're emphasizing some points of it while not, you know, covering everything. In this way we're going to have a really interesting sort of dynamic of fresh and old blood. I know it's quite hard to see at the moment because the glossy effect of the paint is going to sort of detract while, you know, it's being harshly lighted like this. But you'll get the idea if you start doing it yourself, you know, the areas that you want to work in a little bit more newer blood and stuff like that. So you're just going to attack it kind of like that. There's no set way to do this, just kind of whatever feels right for yourself. Yeah, I'm keeping the freshest blood on the areas that are going to see very regular and continuous combat. I think that's the key to it. So yeah, we're going to cover that, and basically then we'll come back for some other techniques that we can use. Okay, so we're going to move on to doing some different types of blood spattering effects now, so the sort of stuff that you'd be applying to vehicles and bigger surfaces. So this is going to be fairly similar to the sponge chipping that I showed you you guys before in a different video, but essentially what we're going to be doing here is applying the blood effects in a sort of more distributed pattern. So we're going to take a piece of sponge, just, you know, normal sponge, that kind of stuff that we've used before. And I'm going to take a tweezers as well. And now what we're going to do is get plenty of the blood for the blood god mix that I showed you all earlier, the one mixed with rhinox hide and black. And we're basically just going to sponge it on to the surface that we want to attack. So you can see here we're going to start working it in. We need to get a little bit more blood than that. And just be pretty random with this, you know, you don't have to sort of follow any distinct pattern, as long as it's like somewhat logical. This is kind of the rule of thumb for any blood effects, just attack it pretty randomly. And you can see we're getting this like weird kind of spattering effect going on. Again, this is like a lot better to use when you're focusing on vehicles and stuff, because it's much harder to control such a large amount when you're working on infantry models. But you can kind of see here, you know, it's mixing with that that mineral spirits layer that was drying beneath it, and it's sort of starting to create this interesting pooling effect. And you can go as heavy or as light as you want here. You know, if you go really light, you're just going to get these like small spatters that you can see here at the bottom. You know, they're very subtle. Or you can go really heavy like we're going with here, which is sort of like a big kind of like blood spatter impact. And the sponge chipping helps it kind of like satellite pattern out. You can see already we're getting some really interesting sort of tonal variation, even though we're only using the first sort of layer of blood effects. So you can play around with that a whole bunch. Even say if we were to do some of it up here, you know, on the drills where it might have mulched someone. Probably going to want to be working on the actual bladed parts of the drill. It's kind of the most logical thing to do. And again, the tweezers really helps here with your control, so I would recommend that over going in with just holding it in your hands. But yeah, it's this is a pretty fun one, and can just mess around with it as much or as little as you want, you know, and create all sorts of interesting kind of patterns. And again, you can kind of like apply it and drag as well if you want to go for a kind of sort of more like splattered effect. I guess like it's been, you know, someone's impacted on the side of the vehicle and kind of been thrown off it. As long as you do kind of like a part where like the initial blood stain is hit. So you can see we're kind of focusing on that in here. So you get this pretty interesting sort of like drag mark going on. But yeah, this is a pretty fun one. I mean, you can be a lot less sort of careful with this one, just like mess around with it, do whatever you want. And it's just really important to do this sort of after you've done your washes and stuff. The blood effect should really be one of the last things that's going onto your model. So we'll just come back with the next part for this and see you guys then. Okay, so we're just coming in with straight up blood for the blood god now, and we're basically coming in with the sponge again and just attacking that area that we've already done. Now we're going to focus more on the main sort of the focal point of where this blood is hit. And again, this is just to create that sort of tone variation. You can kind of see here we have a pretty clear distinction now between the fresher and the older dried blood. And again, I guess you need like a little bit more sort of focus on this part, because you don't want it to look completely random anymore. You want it to make a little bit of sense. But yeah, just you know, cautiously kind of applying. And you can see the parts where it kind of feathers out. You can get some really interesting tone variation going on there. Sort of a very clear distinction between the older and the newer blood. Now, again, it's pretty important to make sure you don't have too much blood for the blood god on your sponge at this point, because it'll just get pretty clumpy. But if you do, it can be really easy just to wipe the sponge clean and then sort of work back in with your blood effects. So you can kind of see it all coming together here. It's some pretty fun little variation on the blood effects. So this is mostly the kind of stuff I do for vehicles, and I mix this with the technique that I showed you previously in the last step. It can give you some pretty nice effects overall. So we're just going to cover a couple more little things and then wrap this one up. Okay, so we're going to look again at the sort of streaking that we can do with the blood effects. So I've just reapplied some mineral spirits to this door pattern here, and you'll be able to see these in much better detail now. So if you look at, well, we're going to start up here. We're going to kind of come in with our blood effects. There's a little bit too much mineral spirits here, but that's okay. We can sort of work around that. Now you can see that already the mineral spirits are causing a little bit of change in how the paint sort of behaves. So you can see it's sort of starting to pool and stuff like that. So as we drag it out, it's going to get more dispersed and create sort of a more interesting kind of pattern. It's almost doing the work for us at this point. And that's why we like to have this sort of mineral spirits layer when we're doing our blood effects, because really just kind of creates a lot of interesting patterning and stuff. So you can kind of see here that the it's sort of looking a lot more natural than if we were just to daub on the blood. And you kind of just got to learn how to play around with this. It's not a case of just apply it straight on and let it do the work for you. You got to kind of come in and pull that paint around, make sure it's separating out nicely. But you can kind of see here we're creating this focal point around this this hatch where maybe someone slapped off the drill and took a big old hit. But you know, kind of giving a sense of direction as we're pulling away as well. So we're just going to work on this a little bit, and then we're going to come back to kind of detail in some more blood. Okay, so again we're taking our straight up blood for the blood god, and we're working back into these areas to sort of emphasize the difference between the newer and the older blood. So again, just taking a really beat up brush and working away on these sections, you can kind of see like the blood is really starting to come to life now. You can drag it out to these exterior points to create that variation too. And it just looks a lot more natural than if you were to apply blood for the blood god straight on, because that can look a bit garish sometimes. And sort of takes away from that natural aesthetic that we're going for. Now again, if you just create some like satellite points around this general area as well, it can really emphasize the aesthetic that we're going for here. So you can see here, like, you know, we have this like brighter blood coming out around here, and then we have the darker as it's kind of getting towards the center. You know, you can kind of play around with it basically as much as you want. Again, like, you know, no set way to be going about this, just whatever you're feeling yourself. Go as heavy or as light as you want. You just really have to think about where blood would logically pool. Now I know in this case with the drill it's not necessarily logical as such. We're kind of trying to go for the idea that some people have been hit off the sides of it and kind of sent on their way. But you know, if we were to really go in on this, we could really do a lot of work with the drill tip on the front. Could sort of really emphasize the blood, but I'm going to save that for a different video where I'm going to show you guys some different techniques. But yeah, you kind of get the idea here. You know, we've covered a few different sort of applications of blood effects. We have this nice blood patterning here, and you know, this big kind of spongy area here where we can, you know, it looks like a pretty big hit. It's after coming into the drill. So yeah, that's that. We're going to wrap this one up for now, and I'll summarize it all for you after this. Well, everyone, I hope you enjoyed that episode. We covered a lot today, you know, the main fundamentals of applying blood effects to your models, and we looked at a couple of different sort of areas that you can apply, you know, looking at those infantry kind of guys, and then, you know, how you would apply it to weapons, as well as taking a look at how blood interacts on vehicles and stuff. Now, the key takeaway from this is obviously being somewhat random, but, you know, with a focus on where you're applying those effects. So I know that can seem kind of weird, you know, it's almost contradictory, but it's really important that you don't go over the top when you're applying these blood effects, and that you keep it as concentrated as possible while maintaining that sort of random splatter effect that you would get from, you know, bloody kind of like battle damage and all that kind of carry on. But yeah, hope this was a good one for everyone. Hope you can find a way to apply it in your own painting and stuff. And tune in next time for the next episode. Until then, stay healthy, stay safe, and kill main bird.